I'm sitting back against the chair, one hand holding a warm cup of tea, the other flipping through an old magazine I bought from the thrift shop on the corner. The early November air seeps through every crack of my tiny apartment on the outskirts of Minneapolis. Outside the window, the leaden gray sky looks like it's trying to press snow onto the ground but is strangely silent. The phone rings suddenly, breaking the delicate quiet. I glance at the screen. Dad! My breath catches for a second. I hit the speaker button, not allowing myself to hope for anything good. Emily, you don't need to come home for Thanksgiving this year, his voice says, light, as if he were talking about picking up more toilet paper. For a second, I think I misheard. I'm sorry, what? We just think it's better if you stayed put, he continues without pause, like he had rehearsed it in his head. To keep things peaceful. Mandy's been a bit on edge lately, you know? I set the teacup down on the table. The sound of ceramic hitting wood is sharp and dry. Mandy. Again. Mandy, my sister. The princess who never had to be responsible for anything. Anytime there's a problem, the whole family holds their breath just so she can feel comfortable. So, what you're saying is I'm not invited just because Mandy gets tense? I enunciate each word, trying to stay calm, though my throat feels tight. My dad sighs, that signature sigh of his that means don't make this a big deal. It's just one day, Emily. You'll be fine. I shoot up from the chair, the wood creaking underneath in protest. Just one day? I repeat, my voice now as cold as the frost on the porch. You say that after I've sent over $4,800 to the house since January, just to keep the furnace running through winter? Silence on the other end. Just the faint hum of the phone line, stretching out the distance between me and him. Don't bring money into this, he finally says, a little flustered. You offered to help. I let out a dry, hollow laugh that echoes in the empty room. Offered? In January when the heating bill spiked and you called at midnight saying the house was freezing, who paid it immediately? Me. In March when Mom cried because the furnace was clanking, who called the repairman? Me again. And in September when Mandy blew through most of her savings on her podcast plan, who paid for the fall heating oil? Still me. He doesn't argue, just goes back to the same tired line. Family is family, Emily. But this time, Mandy really needs calm. She's been through a lot. I stare out through the fogged-up window. Snow is beginning to fall, small flakes quietly covering the walkway. I've been through a lot too, but I was never given that kind of priority. He tries to keep his voice even, but I can hear the impatience creeping in. Don't make this awkward. It's not personal. I take a deep breath, fingers gripping the edge of the table. Then don't expect another dime from me this winter. If I'm not considered part of the family, don't treat me like an aita. I hang up before he can respond, the screen going black like my eyes right now. Outside, the snow keeps falling. Silent, freezing, but not quieter than the room I'm standing in. I sink onto the edge of the bed, hands clasped together, my thoughts tangled like the old cords in the kitchen drawer. That short phone call replays in my mind like a broken tape. They really did it. Excluded me from Thanksgiving, as casually as canceling a dentist appointment. I look up at the small photo on the shelf. Me and my parents at Thanksgiving in 2019. I had just started my first job at the shipping company. Low pay, long shifts, but I still caught a bus home just to sit at the table, eat Mom's roast chicken, and listen to Dad rant about his team losing. That warmth now feels like an old, dusty memory. I get up, walk to the desk, and open my laptop. Wind howls outside, slipping through the old window frame, sharp and bitter. I open the utility payment account, the one I set up for them last winter after Mom sobbed on the phone, saying it was too cold and they couldn't afford heating oil. I was the one who called the oil company every month. I was the one who paid every bill, every dollar. Over $2,400 last year and $4,800 this year, just for heating. I did it not because anyone asked, but because I thought it was the right thing to do. I used to believe helping family through hard times came without conditions. Until I became the extra piece. I pull up the Excel file where I quietly logged every transfer. The last entry reads, 10 months ago, $400. Sent ahead of the cold so they wouldn't worry. I wonder, do they even remember? I watched Mandy, my sister, burn through nearly $16,000 of my parents' savings in 4 months. Her artisanal candle business sounded artsy, until she ordered over 1,000 candles from a mass production plant in Texas, slapped on a handmade label, and thought she could sell them at triple the price. No one bought them, the inventory piled up in the garage, and my parents, instead of scolding or holding her accountable, just shook their heads and said, "She's young. Everyone makes mistakes." I didn't say a word, just quietly sent more money to help them through winter. Meanwhile, Mandy kept posting pictures on Instagram. $7 lattes at vintage cafes, brunches with friends in the latest Zara coat. Every time I scrolled past one, my hand would drift to my back, still sore from a 10-hour loading shift. I almost texted to ask why, but then I thought, maybe it's something I'll never truly understand or accept. I returned to the screen, the cursor blinking over the cancel service button. Just one click and the system will stop automatic payments starting next month. I sit quietly for a long while, not because I'm unsure, but because I'm letting myself remember what it felt like to matter to them. And then I click. A notification pops up. Service will end on November 2nd, 4 weeks before Thanksgiving. I close the laptop and walk to the window. Snow is falling now, each flake as weightless as my father's words on the phone. Except snow, when it falls long enough, can freeze a whole house. They'll notice, but not right away. Mandy will keep believing the world revolves around her. Mom will try to ignore it until her fingers go numb while making dinner. And Dad? He'll get angry, like always. But he won't be able to deny that he's the one who told me to stay put. Part of me feels hollow, like I just let go of something important. But another part, the one that woke up the third time I had to choose between buying a new coat or sending money home, feels lighter. For the first time in a long time, I'm standing up for myself. And I know this winter will be long, but at least I'm no longer the one shivering because of someone else's decision. I started waking up earlier, not because my job changed, but because sleep hasn't felt peaceful since that call. In the days after canceling my parents' heating service, I carried a constant tension, like walking a tightrope. Part relief, part doubt. But every morning, when I get out of bed and my feet touch the cold floor of this small but peaceful apartment, I remember why I did it. On November 2nd, the system officially sent confirmation. The heating oil service for the house at 422 Elm Street had been canceled. I read that message while sipping coffee in the kitchen, the little space heater humming steadily by my feet. A quiet kind of comfort I'd bought for myself, piece by piece, through every extra shift. That day, the snow fell unusually thick. Minneapolis was already cold, but this year winter seemed to arrive a few weeks early. I thought about my parents' 2-story house, the house I grew up in, with its old shingles and thin glass windows, where the cold could creep in after just one night without heat. I didn't feel happy picturing them bundled up in winter coats, but I didn't feel guilty either. It was time they understood that kindness isn't an obligation, especially when it's treated like a given. 4 days later, the first message came from Mom. "Emily, the heating system seems to be acting up. Can you check it for me?" I stared at the message, then set my phone down. I didn't reply. That evening, I got a text from Mandy, just one line. So childish. No greeting, no question, just judgment, as always. She probably thought I'd react, scramble to explain, or maybe even apologize. But I simply switched my phone to silent. On the 7th day, Dad called. I let it ring until it stopped on its own. 3 minutes later, a voicemail popped up. Emily, I don't know what's going on. The house is down to 58 degrees. If you know anything, call me. His voice was hoarse and sharp, a mix of anger and concern. I didn't listen to the voicemail. Instead, I went to the bookstore on Lake Street, bought a new novel, and sat for hours at the cafe next door, where the heater roared and the smell of warm cinnamon waffles filled the air. I let myself enjoy something I had always postponed. Time for myself. On the 10th day, I got a call from an unknown number. It was the heating oil provider. Hi, is this Miss Emily? Are you planning to renew service for the house at 422 Elm Street? We haven't heard back from the homeowners, and the previous contract was under your name. I answered clearly, no, the contract was canceled and will not be renewed. I'm no longer responsible for that house. I see, the rip said, hesitating slightly. So, just to confirm, you're not intending to continue payments? I looked out the window, where slow snowflakes blanketed the street. That's correct. On November 14th, the messages started coming in rapid succession. Mom, Emily, it's only 50 degrees in the house. Your dad refuses to wear a heavy coat and Mandy's been coughing all day. Can you please call me? Dad, this isn't about money anymore. This is family. Mandy, this time more bitter. Fine. Just pretend you were never part of this family. I read each message, didn't delete them, didn't reply. I just saved them as a record for myself of where I once poured out everything and what I got in return. On the 16th day, Minneapolis was hit by the first snowstorm of the season. News alerts advised everyone to stay indoors. Some areas temporarily lost power. I sat by the window, wrapped in a thick blanket, hands curled around a mug of hot cocoa, the heater humming steadily beside me. Outside, the wind howled through every corner of the city. Part of me wondered, were they huddled together in the living room, wrapped in every blanket they owned? Were they thinking of me? Not as a money transfer, but as a person? The one who had quietly kept that house warm for the past 2 winters? Maybe not. But I wasn't waiting for that anymore. I set my phone aside, pulled the armchair closer to the heater, and opened the first page of my new novel. My eyes paused at the opening line. You can't warm a place where they always saw you as the cold wind. And I smiled. Since the heating was cut, the messages from my family increased with each drop on the thermometer. I didn't need to check my phone to guess their contents. They all carried the same tone: urgency, blame, sometimes desperation. On November 17th, the first text came from Mom. Emily, it's 54 DEF in the house. Your dad keeps coughing and refuses to take medicine. Can you help call someone? I read the message, then placed the phone face down on the kitchen counter. On the stove, a pot of potato and celery soup bubbled, its rich aroma filling the small kitchen. I stirred steadily, the heat fogging up the window panes. That afternoon, the outside temperature dropped to 25 DGF. The snowstorm arrived earlier than expected, wind gusting against the rooftops, but inside my little apartment, everything was warm and quiet. I wrapped myself in my favorite sweater, turned on the oven for extra warmth, and poured a cup of cinnamon tea. Somewhere else, I knew they were pulling out every thin blanket in the house, layering clothes, and turning up a thermostat no longer connected to anything. On November 19th, Dad called 12 times. I didn't pick up a single one. A message followed, short and commanding. Call me back. This isn't a joke. I gave a dry laugh. To them, I was still the obedient daughter, the one behind the scenes, the one who handled things. They forgot that even kindness has its limits. That same day, Mandy posted a story on social media, a picture of her feet in thick socks with the caption, "Cold enough to feel like we live in a freezer." I just scrolled past. I didn't feel pity. I didn't find it funny. I just thought it was accurate. They were living in a freezer they had shut themselves into the moment they called and told me to stay back for Mandy's peace. On November 21st, Mom called again, voice choked. Emily, It's down to 40 Jeff in the house. Your dad's sleeping in a winter coat. My hands are so numb I can't even do the dishes. Can you do something? I was prepping grilled cheese for dinner. The oven glowed orange and the scent of golden, sizzling butter filled the room. I didn't answer. That evening, I ate in silence, the occasional buzz of messages breaking through the crunch of each bite. Each time my phone vibrated, I glanced briefly, a habit I'd formed over the past week, then went back to enjoying my meal. I wasn't glad they were suffering, but I wasn't sad either. I was simply living within the boundaries I had drawn after years of being seen as the financial backup, with no need for consent. On November 23rd, 2 days before Thanksgiving, a message from Dad made me pause mid-splice while chopping onions. Emily, if you still consider yourself part of this family, now's the time to prove it. I set the knife down and looked out the window. Outside, snow blanketed the porch and the neighbors' cars. I closed my eyes, picturing the old house, where I learned to ride a bike, where I wrapped my first Christmas gift, now sitting cold and silent. But in that vision, I no longer saw myself in the frame. I poured more hot water into the teapot. As the steam rose, I thought about Mandy, who once told me I was useless for refusing to fund her local fashion magazine idea last year. About Dad, who said I needed to stop being so sensitive when I brought up always being excluded from family meetings. About Mom, who stayed silent every time I was dismissed just to keep the peace. I had been silent long enough. That night, I curled up on the sofa, a book in hand, covered with the light fleece blanket I bought last year. The room was dimly lit by a single lamp, but it was enough. Warm and peaceful. My phone kept ringing. I still didn't answer. Because sometimes, the only way for others to recognize your worth is to disappear from the place they always assumed you'd be. On Thanksgiving morning, I woke before sunrise, the pale light slipping through thin white curtains. Outside, snow had blanketed the steps, and the city was eerily quiet. No cars, no voices, just the wind whispering over rooftops. A gentle reminder that winter had claimed every corner. I turned on the coffee maker and made myself a simple breakfast: crispy toast, peanut butter, and a juicy orange. I didn't prepare turkey. I didn't make the mashed potatoes Mom used to cook. I didn't want anything that reminded me of the old kitchen where the three of us used to squeeze in on holidays. This year, I chose simplicity. Not from lack, but because I no longer needed to pretend things were the same. At 10 a.m., I was on the sofa, blanket draped over me, holding a hot cup of coffee, feet stretched to the edge of the table. A documentary I loved was playing on the TV. Everything felt so peaceful. I almost forgot the emotional storm of the past few weeks. Then the doorbell rang, sharp, insistent. I knew who it was before I even stepped into the hallway. I peeked through the peephole and wasn't surprised to see the familiar figure. A thick gray coat, cheeks flushed from cold and frustration, eyes still holding that look I'd known since childhood. Not apology, but expectation. I cracked the door slightly, warm air spilling out, hitting my father's gaunt face. "Emily," he said, his breath forming pale clouds. "We need to talk." I leaned against the door frame, hand still on the knob. "I don't think today's the right day to talk." "You cut the heat," he said flatly. "The house is freezing. Your mom's sick. She's locked herself upstairs. It's 38 degrees in there." I kept my gaze steady on his. "I didn't cut anything. I just stopped paying. Those are two different things." He frowned. "You know we're not good with tech. The contract was under your name. When you canceled, the company didn't notify us." "Because it was never in your name to begin with," I said. "I handled everything. For 2 years, over $8,000, and then, with one call, I was cut out of dinner to avoid upsetting Mandy. So now, maybe you should handle the rest." He flinched like he hadn't expected me to remember every number. But I remembered. Every bill, every skipped meal so I could send money. Every morning I waited at the bus stop in the snow just to make my shift on time. "Emily, don't make this more complicated than it is," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. "This is all just a misunderstanding. It's just been a tough year. Mandy's been through a lot." I sighed. "Dad, Mandy's been through a lot because she puts herself there. I'm the one who gets pushed out. I stayed quiet when she blew all her savings on a creative academy she dropped after 2 months. I stayed quiet when she borrowed money and disappeared. But when I got excluded from a family meal because of her fragility, that was it. No more." He stood there in silence for a few seconds. Then he shook his head slightly, voice lower now. "We have no money, Emily. We've sold nearly everything valuable. I called the heating company, but we can't afford the upfront cost. Your mom has a fever. We can't take it much longer." I could feel the cold seeping through the cracked door, but I didn't move. "You told me I should stay back, to keep the peace for Mandy." I did exactly that. I stayed back. As for peace, I don't know about you, but I've found mine. He gripped the edge of his hood, eyes narrowing. "You're punishing the whole family over one sentence said in frustration?" I opened the door a little wider, letting him see the warm apartment behind me, the kitchen glowing, the neatly set table, the quiet hum of the heater in the corner. "It's not punishment," I said softly. "It's just letting you feel the cost of pushing someone aside when you no longer need them." He stared at me for a moment, then turned and walked away, his footsteps crunching through the snow. I closed the door, the sound of the lock clicking into place, clean and firm. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, I poured myself another cup of coffee. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was trembling anymore. The week after Thanksgiving, I got a call from Haley, my cousin who lives in southern Minnesota, one of the few relatives who still kept in touch with me despite not being close to Mandy. Her voice came through the speaker, loud and clear, mixed with the sound of wind howling against her window. "I just talked to Aunt Claire," Haley began, straight to the point. "Things at your house are worse than I thought." I sat down at the dining table, holding a steaming cup of ginger tea, my eyes following the fog rising on the window pane. "Mandy's moved out," Haley continued. "Her new boyfriend just broke up with her. She crashed at her best friend's place, but they only let her stay for a few days. Now she's sleeping on someone's couch in Eden Prairie." I wasn't surprised. Mandy always had a way of making everything orbit around her, until no one was left to spin. The affection she'd relied on all her life had finally scattered with the cold wind. "What about my parents?" I asked, my voice calm. "Aunt's staying in a roadside motel near Highway 52. Real cheap, the kind people rent by the week with walls thin as paper. I heard she's got a mild case of pneumonia. And your dad?" Haley hesitated, then sighed. "He sold Grandpa's old watch collection to pay for some temporary heating oil. But it'll only last a few days." I gently tightened my grip around the teacup. That watch collection was the only thing my grandfather had left behind, once displayed like a treasure in the glass cabinet in the living room. Now, it was being listed online, like items no one even cared to bargain for. "You okay, Emily?" Haley asked softly, sensing my long silence. "I'm okay," I replied. "Just a little sad about how it all ended." "I'm not," Haley said, her voice firmer. "I think you did the right thing. If people only come to you when they need something, that's not family. That's using you." We chatted a little more before hanging up. I looked at the phone in my hand, the screen now dark, reflecting my face in the kitchen light. Not happy, not angry. Just the cold clarity of someone who had finally stopped. Not because they were tired, but because they had gone far enough to realize they owed no one anything anymore. In the days that followed, I slipped back into my regular rhythm. Early mornings with coffee, work shifts at the distribution center from 7 to 3, afternoon stops at the local market for fresh produce and new pastries. Evenings spent reading, listening to old jazz records, and occasionally calling Haley to hear stories from outside the family circle. Other than that, I heard nothing from Mandy, Dad, or Mom. The messages had stopped after Dad came to my door. The old house on Ashwood Street was now listed for sale on a local real estate site. Haley said they couldn't afford to keep it, not even with winter just beginning. Sometimes I dreamed of walking back into that old kitchen, the one where Mom used to bake pumpkin pies, where I did my homework in high school, where Dad laid out the morning paper on the table every day. But in the dream, the kitchen was cold, dim, and no one was there. I just stood quietly, looked around, and gently closed the door behind me. I wasn't angry with them. Truly, I wasn't. But I didn't feel sorry anymore either. Maybe because, in the end, I had been cold and alone too. Except I had learned to stand up and build a fire for myself. One night in early December, Haley called again. Her voice rang out between laughter and exasperation. "Emily, you won't believe this. Mandy's on the internet telling some sob story about being abandoned by family like you're the cruelest person alive." I raised an eyebrow. "She did what?" "Posted a video, crying, saying you left your family during a crisis, but not a single word about all the money you paid or how they cut you out of Thanksgiving." I chuckled, a small smile, without bitterness. "Let her talk," I said. "People will believe what they want. I don't have to prove anything anymore." Haley laughed loudly. "I love this version of you. Solid, unshakable. You're honestly inspiring." After the call, I made myself a cup of hot cocoa, sat by the window, and watched the snow fall slowly under the warm glow of the street lamp. The world outside was still cold, still harsh. But I had learned how to keep myself warm. From simple things, from clear boundaries, and from knowing that sometimes, to live in peace, you have to walk away and never look back. That afternoon, the snow was thick and fluffy, covering the small balcony where I kept a dried lavender pot. The city was silent in the -4-degree cold. No one went outside unless absolutely necessary. I was folding a freshly washed wool scarf when the doorbell rang. At first, I thought it was a delivery, but then came a knock, steady, hesitant. That made me pause. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. "Mom." She stood there, bundled in a puffy coat that nearly swallowed her face, a wool scarf wrapped tightly around her neck, snow piled on her shoulders and hat. She clutched an old handbag, her shoes buried deep in the snow, looking both weathered and unfamiliar. I hesitated for a few seconds before cracking the door open, leaving a narrow gap between us. "Emily?" my mother said softly, her voice trembling, whether from the cold or something else I couldn't tell. "I'm sorry for coming unannounced, but I didn't know how much longer I could wait." I leaned against the doorframe, keeping my distance. "Why are you here, in this weather?" "I took the bus," she said, inhaling before coughing lightly. "Then walked the rest of the way. Took nearly an hour, but I thought maybe you'd hear me out this time." I didn't say anything, just waited in silence. "I've been thinking a lot. About Thanksgiving. About all the winters before." She tightened her grip on the bag, her eyes on the tiled doorstep where the snow had started to melt into water. "And I realized I was wrong. Not just for what I said that day, but for all the years I let you carry everything and treated it like it was expected." I tilted my head slightly. For the first time in years, I saw my mother without the mask of strength. No justifications, no polished reasoning. Just a woman trying to find her way back from the path she'd chosen. "Mandy regrets it too," she went on. "She says things never should have gotten this far. She says, you don't owe anyone anything." I let out a dry laugh. "Too late, Mom. Everyone says I don't owe anyone. Only after I stopped paying, only after everything fell apart, do I suddenly become someone worth appreciating. That's not it," she shook her head, her voice catching. "I just want you to know. I understand now. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry I didn't stand by you sooner." I looked at her for a long moment. Those apologies, had they come years ago, might have softened me. But now, the wounds no longer bled, they had become scars. And scars don't feel You chose Mandy, I said slowly, every word as sharp and cold as the wind. When I needed a seat at the table, you told me to stay back because Mandy was stressed. When the house was in trouble, I paid the bills, but Mandy was the one being comforted. When I started living for myself, you called it punishment. So what now? You're here to ask me to carry it all again? She looked up, eyes full of tears. No, I'm not asking you to come back for anything. I just want you to know you matter. And even if you never forgive me, I accept that. I didn't respond right away. I opened the door a little wider, not to invite her in, but to let her feel the warmth behind me. From the apartment I'd kept lit, heated, and peaceful on my own. A stark contrast to where she had come from. I'm not angry anymore, I said honestly, but I'm not the same person either. I'm not the last bolt holding the family together. I've stopped doing that, and I'm not going back. She tightened her grip on her bag, then nodded. I understand. I didn't close the door right away. We stood there a few seconds more, saying nothing, letting the wind blow between the silence. Then she stepped back and turned away. I watched her walk off, her figure shrinking in the snow. When I closed the door, I didn't feel the lightness I thought I would, but there was no regret either, just a warm certainty like the glow of the lamp in my apartment that I had made the right choice. I returned to the sofa, pulled the blanket over myself, and resumed the old jazz track I'd paused. And as the saxophone played, I knew, for the first time in years, I no longer needed permission to live my own life. January passed in a soft, white hush of snowfall. The city lay frozen in bitter cold, and I continued living at the quiet pace I'd chosen. My apartment stayed warm, thanks to the small heater by the window, and the moments I spent reheating soup, toasting bread, or knitting scarves on lazy weekends. There were no more messages from Mom. The last time she came was right after Thanksgiving, and since then, I hadn't heard a word. No blame, no begging, not even the usual New Year greetings she used to send, those generic ones with a picture. I didn't feel sad about it. In fact, I felt relieved. That silence wasn't scary. It was like fresh air after a storm that had lasted for years. Haley still gave me updates each week, as if she were the only remaining bridge between me and the rest of the family. I saw Mandy post asking for help on a community forum. Haley said during our most recent call. She said she lost her job, looking for temporary housing, included something about cracks in family relationships. Same old deflecting. I didn't say anything. I just switched my phone to speaker and kept chopping onions in the kitchen. The aroma of sautéed onions filled the room, overpowering the story being told. Uncle Mark is trying to sell his car, Haley added. That old SUV's still running fine. I heard he wants the money to pay off some overdue bills. Aunt Claire moved in with a relative in Des Moines. She said she needs time to rethink how she raised her kids. Haley chuckled bitterly on the other end. A little late. Yeah, I replied calmly. But maybe better than never realizing it all. As time passed, things I once struggled to see became clearer. Not everyone changes, and not everyone is worth hoping they will. Some things, once broken, are better left where they fell. Like cracks on winter ice, best not stepped on, not patched. I no longer thought about Mandy every night, no longer checked social media to see who was saying what. And I certainly no longer felt the need to explain to the world what I did right or wrong. I just lived, truly. Every morning I woke up in this cozy apartment reminded me that I was standing on ground I chose for myself, not on a shaky foundation built from someone else's expectations. At the end of January, I stopped by the used bookstore down the block. The shop owner recognized me instantly. Haven't seen you in a while, he said cheerfully. Braving the cold, huh? I smiled and picked out a novel about women who left their families to start over. When I got home, I placed the book on the table, boiled water for tea, and sat by the fireplace. The fire glowed bright, orange light flickering against the exposed brick wall. I pulled the wool blanket higher and stared into the flames. Steady, quiet, persistent. Just like me. Somewhere out there, the old house was probably still cold. Maybe they were borrowing space heaters from neighbors. Maybe Mandy was filling out aid applications. Maybe my mother still curled up every night in 3 blankets, thinking about those dinners when we were all together, and the people who no longer wanted to sit at that table. As for me, I no longer belonged to that back then. The fire crackled in agreement. I reached for my tea, steam blurring my vision, though my heart had never been clearer. Winter would last, snow would fall, but this time, I wouldn't be the one shivering. I had chosen peace, and I didn't regret it. From my story, I've learned that not all blood ties are worth preserving at all costs. Some boundaries, once crossed too many times, must be redrawn with finality. I once believed sacrifice meant love, but in truth, unconditional sacrifice only teaches others to devalue your worth. Now I no longer seek validation from my family. I live for myself, and that is the freest thing I've ever done. What do you think about Emily's decision? Was she too harsh, or was it what she needed to protect herself? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to follow the channel for more emotional family stories to come. My name is Madeline Carter. I'm 32 years old, an architect living and working in Seattle, the city where skyscrapers cast their shadows over Lake Union at every sunset. I've been married to Brandon for 6 years. We're both deeply career-driven, and because of that, having children has always been postponed for someday. Our apartment is in a high-rise downtown, just a few light rail stops from my office. From the outside, my life might look like a modern dream. A stable career, a well-furnished home, a handsome and courteous husband always busy with business trips. But behind the door that closes every night, I often feel a quiet emptiness threading through every breath. Lately, I've been pouring all my time and energy into a major project called the Aurora Complex, a modern green architecture development that, if successful, could be the stepping stone to a senior partner position at my firm. This project isn't just work, it's a dream I've chased since I was an intern, a structure that could transform the entire neglected northern part of the city, left behind by outdated urban planning. That afternoon, as the winter sunlight tilted across the bare trees on Pine Street, I returned home after 10 exhausting hours of blueprints, technical reports, and endless meetings. Just as I took off my shoes at the door, I heard Brandon's voice from the living room. "You're home? Was today okay?" His voice was still warm, still familiar, but with a distant undertone. I forced a smile, hung my coat on the rack, and walked into the living room. Brandon was on the sofa, his laptop open in front of him, but his eyes were glued to his phone. He put it down when he saw me. "I almost missed the train back," I said, half joking. "Seattle rush hour is no joke." Brandon gave a faint smile, but it faded quickly, replaced by his usual composed and slightly distant expression. "I get it," he said. "Your work's at a critical stage, but don't you think it might be time to slow down a bit? I mean, spending time together matters too, right?" I hesitated. It wasn't the first time he'd said that. Lately, he'd been bringing it up more often, each time more subtly, like he was testing the waters. "The Aurora project will be done in a few months," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. "Once it's finished, we can take a long vacation or even start thinking about what's next." Brandon nodded, saying nothing more. The room fell into a soft silence, lit only by the glow of the building across the street. The next morning, I woke up early to prepare breakfast. As I brushed my hand over the calendar on the fridge, I noticed something small but striking. Next week was my 33rd birthday. I turned to Brandon just as he came down the stairs, his tie still uneven. "Next Friday. Do you have any plans?" I asked casually, though part of me hoped for something. Brandon paused, then looked at me apologetically. "Oh, I have to go to Los Angeles for a meeting with the partners," he said, hesitant. "It's been scheduled for a while, kind of hard to move." I tried to hide the flicker of disappointment in my eyes. "It's okay. I understand. Work's important." "I'm really sorry," Brandon said, placing a hand on my shoulder. "I promise. I'll make it up to you. I nodded, but deep down, the letdown lingered. In that moment, I recalled the many times he had said, I'll make it up to you. And each time, nothing ever really got made up. I didn't know when the distance between us began, only that it had grown more noticeable, like fine cracks in concrete that seem harmless at first, but if ignored, one day could become a break too wide to repair. And I had no idea that the upcoming birthday week would be the moment that changed my entire life. On Saturday evening, a soft rain began to fall in Seattle, droplets trailing down my windshield as I drove to Riverstone, the restaurant where my parents had invited me for dinner with my younger sister, Sienna. I wasn't surprised to hear Sienna would be there. In my memory, there'd never been a family dinner where she wasn't the center of attention. Sienna is 3 years younger than me and used to be the face of a well-known fashion brand on the West Coast. She always knew how to shine. From her cinched silk dress to her glittering earrings, it's like the light just naturally followed her. While I battled deadlines and construction plans, Sienna's smile on Instagram was enough to make the world shower her with praise. And of course, my parents never stopped complimenting her. I walked into the restaurant, my hair still slightly damp from the rain, and saw them already seated at a window-side table. My mom, Elaine, glanced at her watch, then frowned slightly when her eyes met mine. "Madeline, you're late," she said, not harsh, but with that familiar tone of quiet comparison. "Sorry, it's raining and I just left the construction site," I replied, pulling out my chair. They needed to adjust the glass canopy structure. "It's always about work," my dad, Gerald, said softly, barely louder than a whisper, but I heard it clearly. Sienna smiled and gently touched our mom's hand. "Mom, do you see this bracelet I'm wearing? It was a gift from last week's gala event. They gave it to VIP guests only." My mom leaned in for a better look, her eyes lighting up like she'd just spotted a rare antique. "It's beautiful, so elegant. Totally your style," she praised, completely forgetting I had arrived just 30 seconds earlier. I sipped my water, staying quiet. I hadn't felt sad about the favoritism in a long time. But the silence still left a chill in my heart. When the main course arrived, I tried to steer the conversation. My Aurora Complex project just finished phase 1. The city gave very positive feedback. There's a good chance I'll be considered for partner sooner than expected. My dad looked up for a few seconds, then returned to his knife and fork. "That's good," he said. "But don't get too caught up in it. You're at that age. You should start thinking about having kids." I set my utensils down, trying to keep my tone calm. "Brandon and I are still thinking about it. We're both busy, but—" "Madeline," my mom interrupted. "You're 33. You can't keep putting it off. I want a grandchild before it's too late." Sienna chuckled playfully. "Come on, Mom. She loves her work more than kids. Probably needs a few more projects before she'll even think about diapers." The words were gentle, but they stung like velvet-covered thorns. I looked at my sister, hoping for a hint of empathy, but her eyes only sparkled with amusement at my discomfort. "You don't really believe that, do you?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. Sienna shrugged. "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. You're always serious, always at the office. And Brandon, I don't even know when you two last had a date night." My parents didn't step in, just stayed silent as if Sienna's words were the natural truth. I clenched my hands under the table. What they didn't know was that I once dreamed of having a family too. But that dream kept getting postponed, buried under contracts to sign, meetings that ran into the night, and the growing distance between me and the man I once thought would always be my safe place to come home to. That night, when I returned to the apartment, Brandon was sitting on the sofa, the dim living room light casting soft shadows across his face. I gave him a brief recap of the dinner, trying to use the gentlest words possible. "Same as always?" he asked, remote in hand but eyes on me. I nodded. They talked. About children, and Sienna chimed in too. Brandon put the remote down and walked over to wrap his arm around my shoulders. "Don't let it get to you. You're the strongest woman I've ever known. I rested my head on his shoulder, but the feeling lingered. There was something in Sienna's eyes tonight that made me uneasy. Not just the usual sarcasm, but a strange confidence. Like she knew something I didn't. I'm not the type to worry needlessly, but my gut has never been wrong. The week before my birthday passed like a whirlwind. The Aurora project had entered the rooftop construction phase, and I had to be on site almost every day. The pressure weighed on me. And the long, quiet nights in the empty apartment stretched even longer. Brandon said he was preparing for a business trip to Chicago, a meeting with a partner that couldn't be postponed. I didn't ask further. To be honest, I'd grown used to his unmovable trips. Early Friday morning on my 33rd birthday, strong winds suddenly swept through Seattle. Rain pelted the scaffolding, forcing the construction team to scramble and reinforce the safety frame. I wore a hard hat, a thick coat, and walked with the head supervisor to check the glass canopy outside the main hall. I want to extend this overhang, I said, pointing at the design on my iPad. If we adjust the slope here, rainwater will drain more efficiently. I see that, but, Ms. Carter, he hesitated. It's really slippery over there. How about I check it for you? I smiled and shook my head. It's all right, I just need a quick look. I stepped onto the slick steel platform, holding the railing for balance. But as I neared the edge of the scaffolding, I heard a faint screech from a metal sheet below. Everything after that happened too fast. A slip. Cold air rushing beneath my feet. Then someone's scream carried by the wind. I woke up in a bright white room, the smell of antiseptic thick in every breath. My head throbbed and my right leg felt immobile. A quiet, rhythmic beeping came from nearby, and a gentle voice spoke. You're awake. That's great. I slowly turned my head. A blonde nurse with her hair tied neatly and a kind face stood by the bed, looking at me with concern. I'm Nina, your attending nurse. You fell from the third-floor scaffolding. Your right leg is broken, but thankfully there's no spinal or internal damage. I nodded slightly, trying to stay calm. How long have I been here? Just about 3 hours. We contacted your emergency numbers. I blinked. My husband, does he know? We left a message. And I also called your mother, as listed in your medical record. I turned my head toward the window. The gray sky outside did nothing to mask the chill slowly spreading in my chest. I quietly picked up my phone to check. A message from Brandon. Heard you had an accident. I'm at the airport heading to Chicago. Might not make it back in time, but I'll call after the meeting. Try to get some rest. I exhaled softly. Quiet. A few minutes later, a message from my mom. Unfortunate timing. Dad and I have to babysit for Sienna today and tomorrow. I'll visit next week. Take care. No birthday wish, no real concern. I set the phone down and closed my eyes. Not out of sadness, but because it all felt too familiar. That evening, as twilight settled, Nina returned to the room. On the tray she brought was a small cupcake with a pink candle. Happy birthday, she smiled, lighting the candle. I blinked. How did you know? Nina shrugged. Your birth date was right there in the file. I know birthdays in hospitals aren't much fun, but still, today deserves a candle. My throat tightened. I nodded, trying to smile, but tears suddenly welled up. Thank you. You have no idea what this means to me. Oh, I do, Nina said, placing a hand on my shoulder. You're not alone. When I blew out the candle, I didn't make a wish. There were no wishes left, only emptiness, and a vague sense that everything in my life was about to change, in ways I couldn't yet imagine. 3 days after the accident, I started getting used to the hospital routine. The early mornings began with the sound of medication carts rolling by, the dim sunlight slipped through the curtains, and still, that aching silence from the people who were supposed to be here. Brandon hadn't shown up. Each day he sent only a few short texts, blaming packed meeting schedules. My mom and dad were completely absent. No calls, no check-ins. My sister Sienna only sent a heart sticker Monday night with a message, "Heard you fell, get well swamped." I gave a dry laugh reading that. There was a nameless ache growing in my chest, but I kept telling myself to stay strong. Be logical. Everyone has their own life. I've used work as an excuse to avoid family too, haven't I? One afternoon, after Nina helped me change the bandages and stepped out, I pulled out my phone to check work emails. The Aurora project was still going smoothly thanks to the engineers and project assistants managing things remotely. Still, I felt helpless not being there myself. As I scrolled down the screen, a notification popped up on Instagram. Sienna just posted a new story. I tapped it instinctively. In the short video, my sister was lounging by a pool, holding a glass of fruit juice, her hair neatly tied in a bun, oversized sunglasses on. Behind her was a stretch of blue sky and the pristine deck of a yacht. A yacht? I sat up abruptly, pain shot through my leg, and I gripped the blanket tightly. I opened Sienna's profile and scrolled through her recent posts. Lavish images, banquet tables, roses, champagne. All tagged at Avalon Yacht, one of the luxury cruise lines offering getaways around the San Juan Islands. I frowned. No one in the family had mentioned this trip. Not a word. I kept scrolling. Among the accounts Sienna followed, one name stood out. Sea Pearl Diary, with a profile picture of a beach at sunset. I tapped on it. The account was private, but the bio read, "My Real Diary, for family only." Curious, I sent a follow request. Less than 10 minutes later, it was accepted. I couldn't believe what I saw. It was Sienna's secondary account, where she posted things she'd never share on her main profile. Not the polished photos, not the edited highlights, but raw, unsettling moments. The latest post was a photo of a dining table on the yacht with my mom, dad, Sienna, and Brandon. I held my breath. Brandon was sitting at the head of the table, smiling, holding a glass of wine, with my mom leaning in beside him, beaming. Below the photo was the caption, "Finally having real fun. No one around to ruin the vibe anymore." I quickly scrolled through the previous posts. Another picture showed Brandon lounging on a beanbag chair, wearing a white t-shirt and sunglasses. The caption read, "Brandon's a great liar. I'm in a meeting in Chicago." More like meeting by the pool. My hands started to shake. The phone screen blurred through my tears. I couldn't take my eyes off those words. All the years of trust, the late nights working, the moments I tried to be the ideal wife. Turns out, it was all one-sided. They had planned to cut me out of the picture. On my birthday, while I lay immobile in a hospital bed, they raised their glasses on a yacht, laughing like I never existed. I took a deep breath and wiped my tears with the back of my hand. Nina walked in at that exact moment, holding a cup of juice. She paused at the doorway when she saw me. "Madeline, what's wrong?" I held out my phone for her to see. Nina's face froze. A moment later, she stepped forward and gently placed her hand on my shoulder. "Oh my, they really did this?" I nodded, my throat tight. "I've been betrayed. By my entire family. And the man I called my husband." Nina gave my shoulder a soft squeeze, saying nothing. I sat there for a long time. In the silence, I stared at my phone screen, where Brandon and Sienna's faces still smiled brightly. They didn't expect me to find out. But now I had. I opened the screenshot tool and saved everything. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel afraid. There was only one thing growing inside me: determination. That night, after discovering the truth, I couldn't sleep. The photos, the mocking captions, Brandon's smile next to my family, they played in my mind like slow, searing cuts. But instead of feeling crushed, I felt as if I had stepped out of a fog that had clouded my mind for years. The next morning, I hit the call button for Nina, and when she walked into the room with a tray of meds, I said directly, "You said you had a relative who's a lawyer, right?" Nina paused for a moment, then nodded. "My sister, Lauren, She's a family law attorney. Do you want me to reach out for you? I nodded. As soon as possible. I need legal advice, and maybe to start divorce proceedings. 4 days later, I was discharged from the hospital, my leg still in a brace, but my mindset had completely shifted. Brandon never came to pick me up. No calls, no messages. I didn't tell him I was leaving the hospital either. Instead, I called Avery, my best friend from college, the one who'd been there for me even before Brandon. "There's always a place for you at my place," Avery said over the phone. "Don't go back to that apartment, not right now." She lived in a quiet, cozy 2-bedroom apartment in Fremont, Columbia, completely opposite of the cold penthouse I used to call home. I moved in with just a suitcase and my laptop. Enough to start over. My first meeting with Lauren was in her office on the 10th floor of a glass building overlooking Lake Washington. She was in her 30s, petite, with sharp eyes and an unnervingly calm voice. After I laid out everything, Lauren nodded slowly. "You have strong evidence, photos, public posts, and even the deceptive messages. This isn't just a breach of trust, it's a breach of marital commitment." I handed her a USB with all the screenshots from Instagram, recent call logs, and messages from Brandon. "Are you ready to take this to court?" Lauren asked. I was silent for a moment, then nodded. "I don't want a war, but I won't stay silent anymore." Brandon started calling a week after I didn't return home. At first, he sounded gentle, then worried, and eventually suspicious. "How long do you plan to stay away? Why won't you talk to me?" he said tensely during a Saturday night call. "I need time to heal," I replied, "and to sort things out." I wasn't lying. I really was sorting things out. My whole life. When the divorce papers were officially filed, Brandon didn't react immediately, but the following week his lawyer responded with a request for 70% of shared assets, including our current apartment and joint investments. Lauren just smiled while reading the letter. "We'll respond with a statement that we're fully prepared to present all evidence in court," she said. "And we'll emphasize that if this goes public, his personal and financial reputation could take a serious hit." 3 days later, Brandon's lawyer called back. His tone completely softened. "My client would prefer a more peaceful agreement. He's willing to give up the apartment entirely and won't request a share of the financial portfolio." Lauren looked at me. "Do you want to accept this offer?" I nodded. "I don't need much. I just want my freedom." In the weeks that followed, I focused on recovery and gradually returned to work remotely. The Aurora project was still progressing well. My team kept me updated and, surprisingly, they were doing great without me. I didn't feel left behind. I felt liberated. One late evening, Avery and I sat on her apartment balcony, looking out at the golden city lights reflecting off the lake. I held my tea mug a little tighter. "Do you regret it?" Avery asked softly. I shook my head slowly. "No. If I regret anything, it's not doing this sooner." And then my phone buzzed. It was a message from my mother. "Heard you stirred everything up. Have you thought about the family's reputation?" I didn't respond. I just stared at the words for a long moment, then deleted the message. Not because I was angry, but because I no longer needed them to define my worth. I knew who stood with me now. And more importantly, I had finally chosen to stand with myself. 2 weeks after finalizing the divorce, I decided to close another chapter I'd clung to for too long. My biological family. I sent a simple message to my mother. "I want to see you and Dad." Just once. It didn't take long to get a reply. "All right." Sunday afternoon. Same house. That morning, I sat in front of the mirror for a long time. Not to choose an outfit, but to remind myself that I wasn't going there to apologize, and certainly not to seek the approval I should have had long ago. My parents' house in the eastern suburbs of Bellevue looked just as it did the last time I was there. Neatly trimmed garden, crisp white curtains, and the stone statue of a nightingale by the walkway standing silent like a wordless gatekeeper. I stepped up the porch and rang the bell. My mother opened the door, her usual coldness impossible to hide. "Come in," she said, avoiding eye contact. "Your father's in the living room, reading the paper." I stepped inside. The house smelled faintly of lavender and something else. Too quiet, too stifling. My father, Henry, looked up when he saw me. He folded the newspaper, set it down, and crossed his arms. "I thought you were too busy," my father said, his tone laced with sarcasm. I didn't respond. I pulled out a chair and sat down, face to face with the two people who gave me life, who raised me, and who chose to love Sienna with all the affection that should have been shared. "I didn't come here to argue," I began, keeping my voice calm. "I just want to say what I need to say one last time." My mother crossed her arms, her gaze sharp as a blade. "If this is about us not showing up at the hospital, don't bother. Everyone was busy, and Sienna had a prior engagement. It's not just about the hospital," I cut in, for the first time in my life not hesitating to interrupt her. "It's years. It's the dinners where I was ignored. It's the holidays where only Sienna's name was celebrated. It's the way you always compared me. It's Dad's silence while it all happened." My father frowned slightly. "You're an adult, independent, with a job and a husband. We thought you didn't need." I let out a quiet laugh, not mocking, not bitter, just full of regret. "I used to think like you, Dad, that if I succeeded I'd be loved. But that's not how it works. Love isn't a reward, it's a foundation. And I never got that from this family." My mother gripped the arm of her chair tightly. "You're too sensitive. You can't accept reality. You always think of yourself as the victim." I looked her straight in the eyes. "No, Mom. I don't see myself as a victim anymore. I just refuse to keep playing the invisible one." The room fell silent. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a photo, a picture of Brandon, my mother, my father, and Sienna toasting on the yacht. I laid it on the glass table without a word. My mother's eyes widened for a moment, and my father fell completely silent, his expression hardening. "So, you know," my mother whispered. I nodded. "While I was lying in a hospital bed? On my birthday. And you were out celebrating like I didn't exist." My father stood up and turned away as if trying to escape the truth. My mother, though trying to remain composed, couldn't hide her unease. "Brandon told me the trip had nothing to do with you, that you were too busy, didn't want to come. And you believed him." I looked at her, steady. "I don't blame you for being deceived. I blame you for never asking me, only choosing to believe what you wanted to." I stood up. "I didn't come here to take anything back. I came to say, I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because I need to be free. I'm done waiting for validation. I've chosen my own life." I turned to leave, but before I stepped out, I stopped and spoke clearly. A real family doesn't betray each other. A real family doesn't leave someone out of the celebration without a single word. If that never existed here, then I'll make a new one for myself." My mother said nothing. My father didn't look back. I walked out of that house for the last time, carrying with me a soul that felt weightless. Free from resentment, free from pain, just free. On the way back, I rolled down the car window. The cool April wind brushed against my face, sweeping away everything old. I was no longer Madeline Carter, the daughter who once longed for love from her blood family. I was now the woman who chose to love herself first. 4 months after that final goodbye, I officially signed the paperwork to launch my own architecture firm, Lumen Studio. The name came from a lighting design concept, Lumen, the unit that measures the amount of light emitted from a source. I wanted my company to be just that, a source of light, small but steady and unmistakable. Lumen Studio was based in a small loft space in Capitol Hill, overlooking moss-covered rooftops and cherry trees leaning over narrow streets. I didn't start with a big team. Just me, a fresh out-of-school architect named Jaden, and Arya, a multitasking admin who also handled scheduling. But the three of us shared a belief that architecture wasn't just about building, it was about healing. Our first project came from a chance conversation. One day, I was attending a community seminar at the local medical center with Nina, the nurse who once cared for me. After the session, a middle-aged woman came up to speak with me. Her name was Monica Hale, executive director of Sunny Haven, a children's shelter on the south side of the city. "We're looking for someone who can redesign the old nursery and toddler wing," she said, eyes both hesitant and hopeful. "The building's from 1972. The plaster's falling apart, there's barely any natural light, and funding is tight." I looked at the old floor plans she handed me and nodded without hesitation. "We'll do it, no design fee." Sunny Haven became our turning point. Jaden and I visited the site weekly, rebuilt the entire model, and proposed energy-saving solutions, natural light optimization, and open play spaces for the children. Though small in scale, the project gained strong community attention, and that's how Lumen Studios' name started spreading. But not all changes came from work. One late afternoon, as I was sketching a section of a vaulted ceiling at the office, Nina walked in with a mischievous smile. In her hand were 2 takeout coffees. "Coffee for the dedicated architect, and I've got something to propose," she said, then winked. "Are you free tonight? I have someone you need to meet." I raised an eyebrow. "Who am I meeting?" "My brother," she answered quickly. "His name's Matthew, a pediatrician at Seattle Children's. He's a bit too quiet for his own good, so I thought he could use someone a little stronger to pull him out of his world of stethoscopes and charts." I laughed. "And you think that person is me?" "You're more than that." Our first date took place at a small cafe tucked beneath golden maple trees. Matthew was just as Nina had described. Tall, a bit reserved at first, but with incredibly kind eyes. We talked through the entire meal, not about anything grand, but the little things. He told me about a 4-year-old boy who loved dinosaurs so much he demanded T-Rex-themed bandages. I told him about a 3rd-grade boy at the shelter who helped me choose the paint color for the new playground. After that evening, we started seeing each other every weekend, sometimes walking around Green Lake, sometimes just sitting on the porch, drinking tea and reading. It wasn't loud or fast, but it was gentle and deeply sincere. I didn't think I could believe in beginnings again, but Matthew didn't come into my life to fill a void. He made me realize I could live fully. Not by proving myself or carrying everything, but by giving and receiving, freely. One late night, as we were folding Lunar New Year gift boxes for the children at Sunny Haven, Matthew suddenly said, "I used to think you were too strong, like you didn't need anyone. But then I realized, maybe it's because you're strong, that you deserve real love." I froze for a second, still holding a piece of orange wrapping paper. "It's not that I want to save you," he added, "but if you'll let me, I'd like to walk beside you." I didn't say anything. I just reached for his hand and held it tightly. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to stand alone. And that's how I knew. My life, though once broken, was being rebuilt. Stronger than ever. One early March morning, as tulips began to bloom along Seattle's tree-lined streets, I received a letter in a cream envelope with no return address. Strange. I rarely received handwritten mail anymore, not in an age of emails and texts. I opened the envelope. The soft handwriting was instantly familiar. From the very first line, "Madeline." I don't know where to begin. But maybe it's finally time to say everything. I read each line, slowly, without stopping. It was from Sienna. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't think I deserve it. What Brandon and I did? There's no excuse. I always thought I was the one who had it all, the one who got the better end. But in the end, I realize I made the wrong choice. Sienna explained that after the truth came out, Brandon had been investigated for embezzling funds from a project he once managed. He lost his job, his reputation crumbled, and he was even temporarily barred from practicing due to ethical violations. My family, my mother and father, had invested their savings into high-return opportunities Brandon had promised. It all vanished. They had to sell their old car and move in with Sienna in her small apartment on the west side of the city. Ironically, Sienna wrote, "Only now do I understand what it feels like to be discarded, used. And I wish I hadn't turned my back on you back then." I folded the letter and placed it in my desk drawer. Not because I wanted to forget, but because I didn't need to hold on to it anymore. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel satisfied. I only felt certain of one thing. I made the right choice. Leaving toxic relationships, even ones labeled family, was necessary for me to fully live as myself. My 34th birthday arrived on one of Seattle's rare sunny days. There were no expensive gifts, no grand banquet, just a small, cozy gathering in the backyard of the new place I had just rented, with the people who truly stayed by my side through it all. Nina came early, bringing her homemade salad. Avery showed up with a red velvet cake that still smelled like butter. Jaden and Aria, my close colleagues at Lumen Studio, put together a photo board of all the projects we'd completed in our first year. I stood in the garden, looking at the string lights draped across the trees, listening to the happy chatter and laughter, and felt like a piece of my heart had been gently stitched back together with real kindness. Matthew arrived a little later. As usual, his hospital shift had run long, but when he walked through the gate, holding a bouquet of hydrangeas and wearing a warm smile, I knew that was enough. After dinner, everyone asked me to give a speech. I hadn't prepared anything, but I didn't need to. I stood up and raised my glass. Thank you all for being here tonight. There was a time I thought I'd never feel that sense of belonging again, the feeling of family. But I've realized family isn't where you're born. It's where you're chosen to stay, where you're respected, where you're lifted up. Everyone clapped. I smiled and was about to sit back down when Matthew stepped forward and placed his glass on the table. "Wait," he said, his voice steady and deep. The crowd fell quiet. I looked at him, puzzled, until he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small navy velvet box. And then he knelt down. "Madeline Carter, you are the strongest, most independent, and sincere woman I've ever known. But what I love most about you isn't your strength. It's how you still believe in love, even after being hurt. I don't want to change you. I just want to walk with you. Will you build a new home with me? Not of bricks and stone, but of trust and respect?" The whole garden went silent. I covered my mouth, tears in my eyes. Then I nodded, without hesitation. "Yes, I will." Cheers erupted around us. Matthew stood, pulled me into his arms as applause and warm congratulations surrounded us. I rested my head on his shoulder and whispered through my breath, "At last, I've found my real family. Not by blood, but by love. Unconditional, unwavering." And in that moment, I knew I was truly beginning a new chapter. No more fear, no more doubt, only light, shining from those who chose to stay, and from my own heart that dared to rise again. From my story, I've learned that sometimes, to find the light, we have to walk through the deepest darkness. Family doesn't have to be where we're born, it's where we're heard, loved, and never betrayed. I lost a lot: trust, relationships, even illusions. But in return, I found myself. Life doesn't restart, it simply shifts course. And when we're brave enough to let go, the right things will always find their way to us. What do you think of Madeline's journey? What would you do if you were in her place? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to follow the channel for more heartfelt, meaningful stories about life and family.